life in my family has never been easy. At 25, I'm the eldest of three, with two younger siblings, Joseph and Katrina. Growing up, I was the quiet one, the responsible child who everyone thought had everything together. I think, somehow, they took that to mean that I didn't need anything in return. As the years passed, it became painfully clear that my family's love, support, and even simple acknowledgement were in short supply. I started working straight out of high school. For years, it was just my father and me keeping things afloat financially. My mother was supposedly too sick to work, yet I watched her illness become an excuse. She would spend her days on the couch, wrapped in blankets, the TV flickering in front of her, and, almost religiously, she'd binge on snacks or whatever junk food we had at home. My efforts to motivate her to change went unheard, her only response being a distant, "Maybe someday."
Over time, I stopped trying.
My siblings, Joseph and Katrina, finished school and started working in small jobs after a while. Joseph was quick to lose his position, though dismissed for stealing. Katrina, on the other hand, bounced between jobs, claiming mental health challenges as the reason she couldn't maintain her employment. I understood that we all had our struggles, but with them at home, the financial and emotional burden on me intensified. I took on more shifts, more work, and reached higher positions in my job. I was told I was doing well, that I had great promise, but it all felt hollow because I was always scraping by to help support a family that seemed utterly indifferent to my efforts. My birthday came around 2 days ago, and this year, it felt like a slap in the face. I had come to accept the inequality in the gifts my parents gave us, but this year's experience left me feeling hollow. Katrina had celebrated her birthday just last month, and my parents threw a party for her, a huge one. I protested, pointing out that we didn't have the money, but my father assured me it was fine. The night before, he came to me with a contrived story about needing money to cover emergencies, and, of course, I ended up covering the costs myself. For Joseph's birthday, they'd bought him a brand new gaming console, a top-of-the-line one. And for me, a bottle of generic body wash. The gift was insulting, but even more offensive was their utter lack of awareness of how I might feel. I had sacrificed so much for them, but they acted like I was nothing more than a convenient A-team. Why couldn't I have a party like Katrina's? I asked, my voice trembling as I clutched the bottle. My father looked at me with a strange mixture of annoyance and disbelief, as though I'd asked the most absurd question he'd ever heard. "Why are you so ungrateful?" he demanded. "You know our financial situation." I couldn't hold back my laughter, a bitter sound that echoed through the room. "Our financial situation? You spent hundreds on Katrina's party and Joseph's gift. But for me, it's body wash." My mother's face twisted into a look of hurt, but I couldn't muster any sympathy for her. She always allowed these double standards, and I was done pretending it didn't bother me. I left the room, ignoring their calls, feeling angrier than I had in years. After that night, memories of countless instances where I was treated like an outsider resurfaced. I thought about my teenage years. How, while other kids were forming relationships with their parents, I was always left to fend for myself. My father barely noticed me, while my mother excused every slight as a phase or a misunderstanding. I remember one instance when I was 13. My mother and I had gone shopping, and I had saved up my allowance to buy a book I'd wanted for months. When I got to the register, I realized I didn't have quite enough. I looked to my mother, thinking she might help cover the difference, but she shrugged. "If you can't afford it, you don't really need it, do you?" she said, smiling in a way that told me she believed she was teaching me some great lesson. Katrina, though, had no shortage of luxuries, and neither did Joseph. Both got allowance increases without question, while I made do with whatever scraps they were willing to throw my way. I could understand that parents have favorites, but this was something else entirely. It was as though I was a guest in my own home, expected to serve a purpose, but never truly belong. The days after my birthday were filled with numbness. I went about my routine, but inside, a decision was forming. That night, lying in bed, I felt an unfamiliar surge of determination. Why should I continue to sacrifice everything for people who gave me nothing but disregard in return? I began saving more aggressively. For months, I paid only the minimum required bills and stashed the rest of my income away. I kept my plan a secret, only telling a few close friends, Janet and Lisa, both of whom had known about my family situation for years. One day, when I'd saved enough, I made the announcement. "I'm moving out. I told my parents, my voice steady, despite the whirl of emotions inside me. They didn't take it well. My father looked at me, mouth agape, as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could you even think about leaving? We need you here. I've been here for 25 years, supporting this family, I replied. I deserve to have my own life now. My mother stared at me, her eyes brimming with tears. How can you be so selfish? She asked, as though my decision was a personal betrayal. I didn't try to explain myself further. They would never understand. The first night in my new apartment was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was small, barely furnished, but it was mine. I lay on my bed, reveling in the silence, in the freedom from obligation. There were no demands, no responsibilities hanging over my head. Over the following weeks, I adjusted to my new life. It wasn't easy, balancing work, bills, and the strange silence that came with living alone. But there was something incredibly empowering about it. I started going out with friends, attending social events, and meeting new people. I even began dating, a first for me, as my family had always managed to derail my previous attempts to have a social life. Lisa introduced me to someone, and we started seeing each other. It was refreshing to be with someone who saw me as a person, not as a financial crutch. 1 month after moving out, my mother called. "Where's the check?" she asked, her tone accusatory. I took a deep breath, holding back my frustration. "Mom, I'm not sending any money. You have 2 other children who can work. It's time they step up." Her voice turned cold. "How could you abandon us like this? Your siblings are struggling." I refused to let her guilt trip me. They're adults, just like me. If they're struggling, they can make an effort, just like I did. When she continued to call, I stopped answering. My father tried, too, leaving voicemails filled with threats and attempts to guilt me into returning home. But I was resolute. For once, I was choosing my own well-being over their expectations. One Friday night, I invited a few friends over to my apartment. We were in the middle of a relaxed evening when there was a loud knock at the door. I opened it to find my father, brother, and sister arguing with the building manager, demanding entry. I tried to calm them down, but they forced their way in, accusing me of being a bad daughter and a selfish sister. Joseph started going through my belongings, throwing things around as he shouted about how I owed them everything I had. Before I could react, the building's security arrived. They ordered my family to leave, and when they refused, the police were called. Watching my father and brother get escorted out in handcuffs was surreal, but I felt a sense of closure, knowing I was no longer under their control. After pressing charges, my family finally left me alone. The ordeal was exhausting, but it was also freeing. I realized that their hold on me was broken. For the first time in my life, I felt whole, confident, and self-assured. Over the next few months, I built a life that was truly mine. I found joy in small things, in the independence I had fought so hard for. I finally understood that my worth wasn't defined by my family's approval. I was free to live life on my own terms, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.